He was a mean drunk, the most hated man in town. He terrorized this sleepy Missouri hollow for over 30 years. Then, one day, the townsfolk finally snapped. 46 people claim they never saw a thing, even though everyone was there when they took down the town bully. You do not want to miss this very strange recap about the life, but mostly death, of Ken McElroy. Welcome to True Crime Recaps. I'm Chris. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, but you haven't subscribed yet, don't wait a second longer. Amy and I are here with new stories 3 times a week. So remember to hit that button and the bell so you don't miss a recap. Now, on with the story. Karma is the great equalizer. Nobody learned that lesson harder than Ken Rex McElroy. Ken was a menace to society. The townsfolk of Skidmore, Missouri hated him more than anything. When all else failed, they took matters into their own hands. Today, Skidmore is considered a cursed town, haunted by the actions of 46 locals who didn't see anything. Were they right to carve out the rot, or did revenge get the better of them? Skidmore is a sleepy little place in the northwestern corner of Missouri. It's home to about 200 people, down from over 550 at the turn of the 20th century. They've seen several gruesome crimes and disappearances over the years. You have the murder of Bobby Jo Stinnett in 2004. She was pregnant at the time, and her killer strangled her to death. 3 years prior, 20-year-old Branson Perry went missing under mysterious circumstances. Coincidentally, he was related to Bobby Jo. And a year before that, Wendy Gillenwater was strangled to death by her abusive boyfriend. Maybe this town is cursed. Ken McElroy was born in 1934. He was the 15th of 16 kids born to a poor farming family. They bounced between Kansas and the Ozarks before finally settling in Skidmore. He was 15 when he dropped out of school. He was better at stealing crops and cattle than he ever was at math and science. Sources say his father pushed him into a life of crime. He was an abusive drunk who showed Ken how to take his aggression out on animals. Officially, Ken made a living leasing out portions of his land to other farmers. Unofficially, Ken would steal grain, gasoline, livestock, and antiques, then blow the money on booze and attorney's fees. He was arrested 21 times, yet wiggled his way out of every charge. Witnesses refused to testify because Ken had a violent history. Speaking out against him was a good way to get your teeth kicked in. He'd stalk you like a forest animal, kill your dog, burn your house down. He was like the Kansas City mob rolled up into one menacing ball. That's why he attracted the attention of Richard McFadden, a big city lawyer with a reputation for defending Kansas City's hardest criminals. A mob lawyer by reputation, Richard used to brag about getting Ken off every time he got arrested. To him, Ken was the perfect client. He always paid in cash and always came back for more. It stands to reason that Ken had some mob connections or was at least a few degrees removed from organized crime. He had no formal education and needed a way to move his stolen merchandise. It's not like he could steal one neighbor's livestock and sell it to another. When he wasn't robbing people, Ken was stalking, abusing, and raping young girls. It's said he fathered 10 children with different women, though that number could be as high as 20. He was already married to his second wife when he met 12-year-old Trina McLeod in 1969. Ken was in his mid-30s then. He raped Trina repeatedly. Her parents pressed charges when she told them, but Ken had another evil trick up his sleeve. He asked Trina to marry him to avoid prosecution. She was the only witness, and spouses can't be made to testify against each other. According to the papers, Trina rejected the idea that Ken raped her. They were in love, and she wanted to marry him. But because she was a minor, they needed her parents' consent. And her parents hated the idea. To persuade them, Ken killed their dog and burned their house down. He and Trina were married shortly after. She moved in with Ken, who had already divorced his second wife to marry Trina. She got pregnant at 14 and dropped out of school. When word spread of the fire and dog killing, authorities moved Trina and her newborn into a foster home. They arrested Ken, but released him on $2,500 bail. As the story goes, Ken stalked the foster home day in and day out. He allegedly told the foster family that he'd trade them a girl for a girl to get Trina back. This was probably a thinly veiled threat threat since Ken knew where the foster family's daughter went to school and which bus she rode on. It's unclear if his threat worked or if Trina left under her own free will. Charges against Ken were dropped because they were married. The authorities couldn't make Trina testify. Ken's next run-in with the law came in 1976. Farmer claims Ken was trespassing on his property. When he confronted Ken, he shot the farmer twice. Once again, the police filed charges against Ken, and once again, Ken got away with it. His lawyers produced 2 raccoon hunters who said they were with Ken and nowhere near the farmer's property on the day of the shooting. The people of Skidmore were at their wits' end with Ken McElroy. He'd been robbing, assaulting, and threatening them for too long, and now he was trying to kill them. In 1980, one of Ken's kids entered a grocery store owned by 70-year-old Ernest Bo Bowenkamp. The clerk watched them grab a candy bar, which would be fine if it was any other kid, but this was a McElroy, and McElroys loved to steal. The clerk stopped the kid and asked them if they were planning to pay for the candy. The crying child bolted from the store and jumped in Trina's arms. She went inside and argued with the owners. Ken felt disrespected when he found out. He began stalking Bo Bowenkamp and his wife. He'd show up in front of their home, flashing his gun every chance he could. One day, Ken walked into Bo's shop and threatened him with a shotgun. They fought, and Ken wound up shooting Bo in the neck. He fled while Bo bled out on the floor, but by some miracle, the old man survived. Ken was arrested and charged with attempted murder. They had him dead to rights. Ken McElroy would never taste freedom again. Skidmore could live in peace. Or could they? Ken posted a $40,000 bond and was released later that day. They found him at a local watering hole called the D&G Tavern, wielding a rifle with an attached bayonet. Now, walking around with a rifle was in gross breach of Ken's bond conditions. On July 10th, 1981, Ken was supposed to appear in court to have his bond revoked. About 60 townsfolk gathered at the courthouse, hoping that a sizable crowd of people who hated Ken like the devil would convince the judge to lock him up. They all let out a collective groan when the hearing was inexplicably delayed until further notice. Same old story, said Bo Bowenkamp's wife. Police arrest him, courts let him go. But this story wasn't going to end like the others. If the justice system wouldn't help them, Skidmore would take justice into their own hands. A crowd gathered at the local Legion Hall. There, they talked with the sheriff about all the legal means of dealing with their Ken McElroy problem. The sheriff suggested they form a neighborhood watch, but what good was that? What were they supposed to do? Whistle and hide when Ken rolled into town? That was no way to live. Then, someone erupted through the meeting house doors, screaming, "McElroy's in town." Everyone was on the same page, but nobody wanted to say it. The sheriff knew damn well what the people of Skidmore were planning. He excused himself and drove out of town. Ken and Trina arrived at the D&G Tavern. He sat at the bar and enjoyed his last beer. Slowly, the bar filled with everyone who was at the meeting. Nobody took their eyes off Ken. But Ken feared nothing. The hulking 265-pound man believed he had these people wrapped around his finger. He slammed his glass, stood up from his seat, and left the tavern with Trina. Everyone followed behind. Ken and Trina got in his truck. Townsfolk surrounded the car. Then, a volley of bullets shattered the truck's windows. Ken was hit twice by 2 different guns. He died instantly. Luckily, Trina escaped unharmed, probably because no one was aiming at her. She claimed she could identify the shooter, but everyone else kept their mouths shut. It's said that 46 people were in the street when Ken McElroy was gunned down. All of them turned a blind eye. Nobody called for an ambulance either. The Missouri DA declined to press charges. According to local papers, the attitude among the townsfolk was he needed killing. To this day, nobody has ever been arrested or charged for the murder of Ken Rex McElroy. Trina did file a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town and sheriff. They ultimately settled out of court for about $18,000. Trina remarried and moved to Lebanon, Missouri, where she died of cancer in 2012. It was her 55th birthday. Ken's family home was destroyed in a fire a year after his death. Now, because nobody reported the fire, authorities said they couldn't investigate. The house was vacant. To them, it was just another controlled burn that didn't bother anyone. Or was it the town's last-ditch effort to scrub Ken from the record books? As of 2023, only a handful of people remain that could identify the person or persons that shot Ken McElroy. Soon, they'll all be gone too. His murder will remain one of Skidmore's coldest cases. Ken terrorized that small Missouri town for over 30 years. Karma is the great equalizer. Most believe Ken got exactly what he deserved. What about you? What do you think?
And that's your recap.
Thanks for hanging out with us today.
If you like getting all the crime in half the time, go ahead and tap that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss a story.
We're here Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but don't go away. Catch up on more recaps right here, right now.
Until next time, take care.